Hello, everyone. This is the second episode of Galaxy Burn. The first was me trying to do an Adam Curtis style documentary on the least amount of money possible. Kind of worked. This one is going to be more in the format that we're going to be sticking to going forward, which is me and a guest talking about probably one of the many 40k books. In this case, it's going to be Horus Rising. And to talk about it for the second time, because I forgot to press record the first time.
That's fine.
Is November Kelly.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Again, yeah. One of my absolute favorite podcasters who you can hear on Trashfuture, Kill James Bond, and Well, There's Your Problem.
Absolutely. Nailed it on all three. And
I know. I can even do the old Trashfuture intro if you want.
A podcast about how unless we build fully automated luxury communism, the future is and will be trash, which
sometimes it's space communism. Sometimes
yeah. Well, ever since Bastani pared down fully automated luxury gay space communism for just Falk, which I think was maybe representative.
I used to date the person who invented that term.
Really?
Fun fact about me. Yeah, it wasn't Bastani, obviously.
Yeah. it's always interesting where these things show up. Like it's like the sole thing I can claim credit for, the one piece of like legacy that I have is inventing Femboy Hooters. Like not
Good
useful
invention
to anyone, but I'm on the like Know Your Meme page as the first person to come up with Femboy Hooters. So
okay, what like famous creator of memes that have stood the test of time. Remember from my piss and little podcast. Wow. This is a good day.
Absolutely. I'm like sort of like honoring you as my presence. I would have the like kind of named figurine that's like taller than everybody else. Got like big gold armor on.
Hell yeah. So yeah, we're going to be talking about Horus Rising. So if you at home watched the previous episode, you'll know about what a big fucking deal and a big lot of pages the Horus Heresy books were. I think something like 28,660 something pages in total. And that's just the mainline books. That's not counting 18 Primarch books and a dozen or so spin-offs, short story collections, omnibuses. It's
so you could really do like a kind of like PhD amount of reading just on this one narrative.
Yeah, just on angry space Nazis punching each other.
Yeah.
And having problems with their dad.
So it goes with the territory of angry space Nazi, I feel.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, you don't become an angry space Nazi because you had a good time as a kid.
Just like sort of space marine infant playing with blocks quite happily,
Yeah, that wouldn't happen. We'll talk about how childlike these giant dudes are. But first, the author Dan Abnett, he's like the big guy for not just the Horus Heresy novels, but for the Warhammer books in general. He's the numero uno guy of this entire line. We have other decent writers, but he's the one. He's written a 20 volume collection called Gaunt's Ghosts, which is probably one of my favorites. It's kind of like Sharp, but in space with less Nazis and more guys who are kind of like just caught up in all this shit.
I believe Riley of Trashfuture is a fan, for instance.
It is, yeah. I mean, I know you like the Master and Commander books. It's
very much
as close as you're going to get to this, while still having like the occasional orc, which is I always found lacking in the Master and Commander films. But okay, so just to give an idea of how prolific this dude is, and he is staggeringly prolific. Would you be so kind as to say a number between 1 and 10?
Sure. Let's go with 9.
Okay, let's do 9. All right. So in the year 2009, Dan Abnett wrote Knights of Pendragon for Marvel Comics. He wrote Punisher Year 1, Star Trek The Early Voyages. That's 17 issues of that.
Wow.
Nova, which is, I assume, your biography.
Of course, yeah. Sort of preempted me there.
Secret Invasion, Nova Corps. So you got like a core around you.
It's the genre, you know, that my podcasts are in.
War of Kings, Guardians of the Galaxy, which got made into the films Guardians of the Galaxy. There's like 3 of them. They're made billions of dollars. I don't think Dan Abnett got a lot of that because they weren't his characters. They were Marvel's characters. He just combined them in that way. He wrote something called Fusion, something called Kingdom, something called Insurrection, something called Lords of Misrule, Superman versus Batman, The Authority, Exterminatus. He wrote novels, Blood Pact in the Gaunt's Ghost series, Ravna in the Eisenhorn series, Prospero Burns in the Horus Heresy, in the Doctor Who universe, a book called Primeval, 272 pages. That's just on that one book. And so, like, the 352-page book original novel Triumph.
That's, I mean, I'm feeling a lot worse about my productivity now, is the thing. Conversely, I don't know that it's winning a Nobel Prize anytime soon, is the thing. And, well, it's true that, like, no, I mean, yeah, quantity may have a quality all its own, but by the same token, it is really all its own, right? It's a very distinct style of writing, at least this book. And it's not. Yeah, it's not
great.
The main thing I would say about this book, or one of the main things, is that it's not what you'd call good, right? It's well written in the sense of like craft. It like gets you to the point. It gets things moving and keeps things moving, which I guess you have to if you're going to write like 4 of these a year plus God knows how many comics. But it felt to me reading this a bit like drinking an entire can of Monster Energy in like one go, in that it tastes terrible. Scientists aren't, aware of the ramifications of its hazards yet, right? But at the same time, it does it contains a lot of energy. It certainly like grabs you. And so reading about people getting like hacked apart with chainswords or whatever, it's done with the degree of craft that you're like, 300 pages have like flown by to read as much as to write, right? And it's kind of, it might have a lot of empty calories to it, but that's fine, Sometimes you want that. You can't always be reading like à la recherche du temps perdu, right? Like sometimes this is worthwhile to kind of like do as a palate cleanser. And to be honest, I enjoyed it.
Yeah, I mean, between this and reading about Rachel Cusk remodeling her house, I think I'll go with this. It's big and silly and loud. It's a loud book. That shouldn't be possible, but this is an extremely loud book.
It does kind of jump off the page, not because it has a great deal of like emotional weight necessarily, but because you're throwing around a lot of stuff that kind of gets the adrenaline going. Yeah,
I'm not saying it's stupid by any means, because it does, intentionally or not, it deals with some like major things.
Sure.
The war on terror, the nature of religion, just basic morality, the morality of what these people are doing. It is a book where literally every character is evil. It's like 1,000 times more evil than if you wrote a book about like SS officers.
And also like I said about craft, right? Like I think you have to have a certain like ability and mindset to be able to write this novel that a lot of other writers don't, right? And it's not a kind of, I'm never going to kind of come down on that as a style of writing or that as a kind of craft, right? To be like, oh, this is hack stuff. I only like serious books or whatever, because this is it like requires a degree of like talent and focus and all the rest of it, and it's like well constructed for what it is, right?
Hmm.
It's just at the same time, it's you couldn't get Margaret Atwood to write this novel, right? I would love to
Oh,
see someone try.
well,
I
her last one was actually her last one. What's it called? The Testament, which I think I have around here somewhere. I think that was worse than Horus Rising. That was like yeah. I mean, her early other stuff is fine, but the Testament's just stinker. Hated it. It was like a bad YA novel set in the greater scary America universe. But apart from that, yes, I don't think should be a great fit for the Black Library novel line. I don't think Rachel Cusk either would be particularly great. Atessa Mosfeg could probably do a lot of gross stuff with like poop, but I don't think she'd capture what it's like to hit someone with a chainsaw.
It's a particular string to have to your bow, right? To be able to write about like people getting dismembered. Or about the grim future of humanity, which is only war. Like, and I think it's something that Avner does very well.
Yeah, I mean, he's obviously he kind of comes from a time and a place where a sci-fi writer's job was just to pump out content as much as you could into things like amazing fantasy. Like there's a thing that goes from him to like Philip K. Dick, or even as far back as H.P. Lovecraft, who I have tattooed on my shoulder. I'm going to get removed. I know he's racist.
Just get like a cover up, you know, like
or just frown at it all the time, so everyone knows I don't like him.
Shaking my head so people know I disagree with my own tattoo.
Yeah, just always shaking my head.
You can like pan for. You can pan for gold in like the kind of like output of writers like that, because like H.P. Lovecraft might put out like a short story in which the like end twist is this character is black the whole time and you're supposed to be like horrified, but at the same time also come up with a lot of like cosmic horror stuff that's been very influential and that really like grips people.
I mean, cosmic horror comes up is in I mean, not in this one specifically, it's in Warhammer a lot. The horror in this is more your straight up religious demons, exorcist kind of horror.
You can and like, just because it hasn't like aged well, and I don't mean it hasn't aged well just in terms of the racism of it, that's its own thing. It's still like, it was bad at the time too. What I mean is like, as like craft, as the kind of like tropes that it's built out of have kind of aged. I was thinking a lot about like Dracula recently, because I was thinking about how intense it must have been to see like one of the early Dracula movies, if you hadn't seen a lot of movies before, where he does the like cloak thing, and not having that be sort of self-parody already, probably quite effective, right? And by the same token, a lot of the H.P. Lovecraft stuff, now that we're kind of like in an age where you can be like, incomprehensible horror, fuck off, I can comprehend that easily. It's a guy with like a squid mouth, but like at the time, presumably a lot more compelling. And I think even like on a sort of micro scale, going back to 2006, right? Some of this stuff probably hit differently at the time than it does now.
Yeah, I mean, especially the political aspects, because we like grew up in the war on terror. Like I remember 9/11 happening when I was at school. I lived near a military base, and there was like planes going everywhere just in case it was like Al Qaeda wanted to hit like Washington, New York, and Dorset. So yeah, this would have hit very different in 2006. Like a lot of the tropes are tropes from the war on terror, like the embedded journalists who follow the guys around so they can make a history of this great crusade.
Yeah, they do a
Right?
kind of like generation kill with Space Marines, which is it's quite compelling stuff, I think.
Yeah,
And
because Generation Kill was compelling. It was awesome.
yeah, exactly. It kind
Maybe
of
that's
has
the thing David Simon ever did. I'll,
hmm,
I'll
it
find that
has
out.
it has kind of the like Bush era leftism, right, to it.
Mm. Oh yeah, yeah. And apart from that, it also has related that it also has the kind of new atheist thing that was coming up
Hmm.
at the time. This came out at the
Yeah.
same time as the God Delusion and books like that,
Hmm.
where because of what was happening in the Middle East, ostensibly because of religion, Bush talking about Gog and Magog and stuff,
Hmm.
people started questioning religion a lot more. And yeah, and now that's all gone to shit, obviously, because they've just revealed themselves to just be just monstrous racists who just didn't like brown people.
Hmm.
But at the time, the war on terror like fueled this big burst of atheism and flying spaghetti monster and horrible, just dumb shit like that we laugh at now, but was
Yeah.
I
No,
was a kid
absolutely.
back then, and flying spaghetti monster was funny and profound to me when I was that age. When that came out,
Hmm.
I thought this is a clever idea.
Yeah,
Very
absolutely.
sorry.
No, no, not at all. I mean, I think too the atheism in this is that there's a lot of like Christopher Hitchens inflection to it, right?
Mm,
And it actually goes a bit further than a lot of stuff at that time in having a bit more discomfort with that and questioning that a bit.
mm,
Because if the kind of like um, you know thesis of a lot of sort of atheism at the time or skepticism at the time was like, well, obviously, the neoconservatives are very bad because they're religious, but like also we're engaged in a kind of like civilizational struggle against Islamofascism, or whatever else Christopher Hitchens believed, right? This book kind of has more sort of like discomfort with that in a way that I think reflects something like Generation Kill or a lot of the other stuff like it, where it's like, okay, but like sure we're right about the rationality stuff, but what about our methods? Are we being too brutal here, right?
mm.
And I think that's it's not solely squeamishness, and I have a slightly my read on that. Well, we'll get into it, I suppose, but it's kind of like it sits sort of uneasily with it, which I like.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, just to bring a little context into this. So when it starts out, the Horus himself, Horus Lupercal, is one of
Mm,
the Emperor of Mankind's sons, and he is out of the 18 of them who are still alive, he is the top one, and he has been made War Master of the Imperium. That means he's in charge of the Great Crusade to go across the galaxy, find the lost human civilizations in the galaxy, and bring them into the Imperium.
mm,
And if there is any alien or Xenos, if we're getting all technical,
mm,
they must kill them. They want to kill literally everything that isn't human in the galaxy.
mm,
Um, Although later in the book, Horus himself and one of his Space Marine sons does express some discomfort with that, and he does at one point allow himself to not kill aliens on sight, but then he has to end up killing all aliens on sight and all the humans who are allied with them.
mm,
It's yeah, as I mentioned earlier, everyone in this, by any rational moral standard, everyone in this book is utterly evil beyond.
sure.
Yeah, there's like Nuremberg laws. Every one of these guys would be hung, probably from a very strong rope, because they're like huge dudes. They're massive, massive, muscular
Yeah.
boys. But yeah, these guys have committed billions and billions of genocides as
Mm,
they go around the galaxy, just wiping clean anything that isn't human, and often a lot of humans too.
the kind of table stakes here is everybody involved is like mega Hitler levels of sort of like genocide.
Yeah, and I mean that's something again because they don't. That's something you're just going to have to accept, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's part of the setting, right? Like
Yeah.
they're not joking about the grim future of humanity, right? Like, and I guess to an extent that's fine, but it also it allows you to do some interesting things with the like politics of it. But by the same token, it can also be kind of an excuse, right? You can be like, well, this might reflect the war on terror or whatever, but like there's this, much like the war on terror itself, the discourse about it is inherently limited by the fact that there's all of this slaughtering going on that is like fundamentally like unacknowledgeable other than just, oh yeah, that's table stakes,
Yeah, and it shows people getting guilty because they have to slaughter every single alien race they come across, and usually most humans who don't want to be brought into this empire. Garviel Loken, who's like the main POV character, has a sit down with one of the priests who, well, kind of a secular priest who is there to enlighten people, and talks about his guilt, how he feels that they just have to go around the galaxy killing and killing and killing, never stopping. And I think you've got to there's a lot of people in the fandom who don't get that you're supposed to take that whole thing ironically. You're supposed to think, oh God, everyone here is a psychopath. Everyone here is an absolute monster. There are people who argue, like with a straight face, that they're justified in doing this. It's good that they wipe out alien species, and that's a very silly reading of this book, and it's definitely I know definitely awful and all that, but it's definitely not what's intended.
But it's kind of, there's an interesting war on terror lens for this too, because Lorcan, who's our protagonist for the better part of the book, is kind of this like he's like Space Marine Pat Tillman, right? Because I guess if you're targeting the audience of Warhammer 40k in like 2006, right, you're aiming for people like, especially like teenagers and young people who are smart enough to be aware that there is something like morally wrong with the war on terror and the way it's being prosecuted, right? But who are also like, guided by the beauty of our weapons, right? They're compelled by the missile that flies down the air vent perfectly, or which I think is a lot of people, right? And the way that it kind of squares that circle is the way that I think a lot of real people did in that situation, which is to be like, well, the difference between like us and them is that, yeah, we still do all of the like war crimes, but we feel badly about it. We kind of like we obliterate this planet with remorse, right? And your questions, your doubt, your dissent is like a valuable thing because it sort of tempers the sort of cruelty with which we prosecute the war, right? And I think that was a niche that a lot of liberals were trying to carve out for themselves. And I think it's a kind of like astute criticism of that to put this in this book about this, the sort of like band of 9-foot-tall vending machine shaped genocidaires being like, well, one of them feels very badly for you, so you're welcome.
3 out of the 4 don't. One of them, 2 of them are just plain monsters. One of them just makes very mid jokes the whole time. You're not going to laugh at this book.
Yeah, but you have a kind of like devil's advocate on the kind of the kind of asexual polycule of like 4 dads who sort of like quietly govern this legion, right? As well, one of them feels badly.
Yeah, and he's there because he feels badly.
Yeah, exactly. This is a
human, and he has to be the viewpoint character, and he voices the audience's concerns. It's not subtle.
No.
It's it's real plotting with a hammer, and to see his emotional arc.
Hmm.
And that emotional, I mean, spoilers, because I haven't read the next two in the kind of mini trilogy.
Hmm.
Yeah, that arc doesn't end up going much anywhere.
Yeah.
The arc, I think he hit a nail on the head with Pat Tillman. He gets fully Pat Tillman the fuck out in the later.
I'm trying to change the Imperium of Man from the inside, you know.
More or less, he kind of does. Yeah, there are a bunch of people who do kind of just do that. I mean, obviously there's like demons and stuff, but yeah, that kind of is the way it ended up going. And if you play Warhammer 40,000 as opposed to 30,000, you know how well that went.
Yeah. I mean, this is the kind of thing about which you can sort of like criticize this stuff, is to be like, well, the fundamental constraint here of the setting is this is a rough neighborhood, right? This is an argument you will hear deployed by the perpetrators of real life genocides all the time, right? Is to be like, well, obviously we don't like having to do this, but if we don't, then we will be slaughtered. And any attempt to like incorporate feeling badly about this is going to be like ruthlessly exploited by the people who want to slaughter us, as it proves to be, right? Because in this setting, it can't not be. And I think if you're trying to make this point about like these are all terrible people, this is a kind of like unreformable criminal system, that kind of coexists very uneasily with the existence of everything else in the setting of like, oh yeah, it is rough out there. Like there are kind of like malicious psychic forces at work preying on your doubt and your like human tendencies, right?
Yeah. I mean, kind of any Black Library book has like its thumb on the scale in terms of morality. Like if you try and do a good thing, it's if you try and be merciful or kind, then you're fucking up, and you're going to end up paying for that in some way. Obviously, the people who are just out and out sadist psychos, they're any better. But there's like an ideal person in 40k books. I think Garviel Loken and Saul Tarvitz are that kind of guy who is aware of how bad things are, but is so steadfast and stoic and loyal, and ultimately like manly. They're very manly types. That they can somehow thread the needle between like, feeling bad about it, but also doing it. And that's it is. You do see the threads being pulled.
The kind of the sort of regretful war criminal. It's like this is the kind of book that Nazi Germany would have written about the Eastern Front had they won the war in like 1980. But thanks to advances in technology with the War on Terror, we were able to compress this into while we were actually doing it, you know?
Yeah. I mean, I know there is a very strong right-wing fan base for this, and obviously I believe that they're misinterpreting it, and there are ways to read it that are much better. But you could just be a straight up Nazi and read this and be like, yeah, totally. Have you ever read has this book by Norman Spinrad? He wrote the Iron Dream. It was like a book within a book. It was a book written by Adolf Hitler if he had never become like a Nazi and had just lived into the 1950s and became a sci-fi writer, like Philip Dick or someone.
There's a very similar book called A Man Lies Dreaming by Levi Tadar that's also really good along those lines.
Yeah, and what Norman Spinrad ends up writing, I don't know if this actually influenced 40k or not, but if it didn't, then it's so similar, then it's just weird. The book that Hitler writes in this book is the early history of the emperor on Earth. It's the Earth is devastated in a nuclear war. There are tribes and gangs everywhere, but this one great golden god man unites all the tribes and then sends his progeny off into space to conquer the galaxy.
The coming man, as I think Hitler himself called like that figure that he imagined right before he like fucking killed himself because he was terrible at everything. Yeah, I think absolutely, and it, as well as this, there's the kind of like racial aspect of this book is interesting because the sort of Space Marines themselves, all white, as far as we know. The Emperor himself looks like, always depicted as looking like a kind of member of a hair metal band who just happened to stumble into. The
most racial he'll ever get is Keanu.
And the novel kind of actually prefigures something I think is like quite astute again, where it's like the Empire is kind of to an extent multi-racially human. Like one of the remembrances is black, for instance. And
yeah, she's described in very odd ways.
She's that hasn't aged well.
She's as black as coal.
But it does kind of anticipate the way in which American Empire now, for instance, is like, well, your diversity will be respected to a point as long as it's like useful for imperial reproduction, right? But I think it also it manages to like thread this needle between that and all of the guys like in charge doing the stuff are these like, again, like 9 foot tall white guys, right? And I think you can kind of read it one of two ways there, which I appreciate.
Yeah, sexuality is also there's one line that implies that everyone's bisexual, or maybe that they're not. It's a very ambiguous
in the grim future of war, everybody's bi. It's just it's not that big of a deal because everybody's got other stuff going on.
Kinda, yeah. I mean, it's obviously the Marines themselves are totally asexual because they're just giant children. It would be kind of morally gross if they had any romantic feelings towards anyone.
Yeah.
And even later when all the slash stuff happens, those guys, they don't fuck because of that's going like 5 books down the line.
Yeah, it's like doing a lot weirder stuff than fucking, like...
Oh, big time, yeah. There's this one scene in book 5. The real heads will know what I'm talking about, but it gets pretty rough there. Imagine like the end of Suspiria, but like in a Wembley Stadium sized configuration.
I was thinking kind of end of Event Horizon as well.
Oh yeah, it's always Event Horizon. You can always there's plenty of Event Horizon going on all through this. But where was I? Yeah, the Marines themselves, they talk in that like, brother, I swear an oath upon thee kind of way, because they too. And it's if you play the Space Marine 2 game, it's I think like every other word is brother. It's just it gets a bit grating after a while. But,
very, very, very manly men,
oh yeah. They kind of like constantly calling attention to their masculinity and how manly and brotherhoodly they are.
It's interesting too that the sort of the manly things that they do are a kill and like hang out with each other. Like again, there's no sexuality to it definitionally, right? And I like the things that and this book, doesn't sort of pull its punches with this about like how fucking weird and inhuman they all are. Whether because they're all like sort of highly genetically modified. And like you say, quite childlike, and so all of the one of them, I think Lorcan himself is described as having like a very equine face, and it looks like he's been like fucked up by this to the extent that he's a like again 9 foot tall dude who's like totally rectangular and also looks like a horse, like and I think leaning into that is interesting. That it's not something that you typically see in the kind of more fascist readings of these books, right? Like, everybody who loves these guys because they think that they're like anti-woke or whatever is, I think, deliberately missing a key part of the like transhumanism required to
Yeah.
get there, right?
Yeah, they're not supermen because they're not men. They're
Mm.
not post-human because, well, they're literally post-human, but they're not like the Nietzschean overcoming bridge between man and Superman. They're just a whole different thing
Mm.
that is like vaguely pretending at having human emotions, but they're so warped by what's happened to them, like being taken away from your parents at 8 years old, brainwashed, put through this like monstrous induction routine, genetically modified. So at like 12 years old, you're 9 feet tall and
Mm.
built like four wrestlers taped together. It's yeah, like if that happened to a real person, and like the point of writing is to make stuff that's even weird stuff seem like it's happening to real people.
Mm.
Like if that happened to a real person, they would be as fucked up as Space Marines are. And Space
Yeah,
Marines use
absolutely.
that whole knightly Diendal brother arts thing in order to hide the fact that they're a bunch of weird child soldiers.
Mm.
And yeah, I think at its best, when talking about Space Marines, like that works. There's so many Warhammer books that are just like a guy getting his two favorite toys and banging them together and saying they're fighting.
Mm-hmm.
And they kind of forget that, yeah, these are weird, unnatural, creepy people.
Mm.
They're barely people. I think Dan Abnett gets that. He's written another book called The Iron Snakes that's
Mm.
just about Space Marines, and it like fully realizes that Space Marines are just odd. They're not
Mm.
real people at all.
Yeah.
And I obviously he can't get so into that because we have to use Loken as a viewpoint character in this.
Mm.
But when it comes out and it's only in little drips and drabs here and there, that's really satisfying. I like that. That's just like wow.
Yeah, absolutely.
So one of the things that people really like about Dan Abnett's work, and this is from like the fans, so grain of
Mm.
salt, but is the way he writes combat and fighting and war.
Yes, yeah. It's he's very good at it. It's very visceral.
Mm,
And I think a real benefit to the setting here is that you don't have to be particularly wedded to the details. Like, as much as we talked about the fans being like on the spectrum, right, and being able to tell, like, one kind of dreadnought from another or whatever. Like, you don't have to sort of like go back and do research in the same way as you might for like some trying to do the same thing in like World War II, right?
mm,
Um,
yeah.
you're allowed to speculate, and I think he does that very effectively. On what does it sound like? What does it smell like? What does it look like when a guy gets like totally bisected by
Mm.
by like a chainsword?
There's lots of smells in this book. It's
Mm,
very sensual in the correct
yeah.
use of the term.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely. I liked the observation, just going back to what we were talking about earlier about like how badly the Space Marines smell. Like, unless
mm,
they're sort of like part of the sort of like 0.1% who's like, it sort of like officer class who are all smelling like like fragrant perfumed oils because they spend all their time in their arming chambers just like, dousing themselves in potions. Everybody else stinks of sweat because why wouldn't they?
yeah, they're big children. They don't want to take baths. Baths are gross. Smelling good's
Yeah,
for girls.
plus the like porcelain cost alone of building a bath big enough.
Oh yeah, you'd go through whole worlds just to try and get like future Armitage Shanks planet. But
The Armitage Shanks Forge world is a really
yeah,
compelling thing. They're just cranking out like 14-foot wide bathtubs.
I don't know if you got as far as the end because I mean one basic observation about kind of any fighting in any book ever
Hmm.
is that yeah, it can be fun to hear about people getting blown up and stuff. But it works better when it has emotional stakes. And
Sure. Yeah.
there's a lot of combat in this book that doesn't have any emotional stakes. Like the whole middle section of the book, where it's just like, we're on a planet for some reason. There are giant bugs. We must shoot them. We must show how
so
cool
kind
we
of
are at shooting bugs.
phases into Starship Troopers for the whole middle act, which
Yeah, I mean, well, even Starship Troopers, they had a reason to be there. They they actually just like turn up on a planet and decide to shoot the bugs because it's awesome to do that, and they love shooting aliens so much that like the aliens can't even like they can't get into space. They're not intelligent. They are just giant insects, and they could just leave that planet alone, and they choose not to.
bombard
And
it from orbit, etc., etc. Like, sure.
yeah, they just really like chopping up bugs with powered swords.
That's
And
gonna
yeah,
kill the
that whole
pacing a
bit,
bit. Yeah.
yeah, that whole bit just falls flat. But there's a fight at the end, the very end, where Garviel Loken is fighting someone who's kind of his friend. This genetically modified alien human who has been explaining to him about chaos, about the greater universe that he hasn't been told about. And they become almost like good friends, and then they have to kill each other.
Yeah.
And
because of like sort of a failure to communicate, right? Like it's sort of the statement we're making here about the Imperium is that this is something that is like incapable of diplomacy because diplomacy is like heretical to it. And again, not for no reason, as we see, because like by trying to be diplomatic, this is the thing that like opens the door for the kind of like ending of Suspiria squid-mouthed freak shows, you know?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of implied that that wouldn't happen if in this one case. Like it would happen in a million different cases, but with when they're talking to the species called the Interrex at the end, they seem like they've got it all figured out. They're like a more grown-up version of the Empire.
Yeah.
They're okay with aliens. They understand.
Unfortunately, next to the entire United Nations versus one 9-year-old, we have shot full of human growth hormone.
Pretty much, yeah. Yeah, that's like the end third of the book is just the one nerdiest kid on the playground and the dumb jock on the playground who's had a bad home life and wants to take it out on everyone. They almost become friends. Then the big jock misinterprets something and beats him to paste. Except times a billion, because obviously everything here is times a billion, and it ends up in another genocide. Of the, I think we're up to 3 in this book now.
Yeah, 1 per act.
Yeah, it's like you put a genocide on the mantelpiece in the first act, and it keeps going off again and again and again. It's there's I know 3 genocides. One of them is space bugs. You know, I'll kill a cockroach, but
sort of lightly brushstrokes, you know. It's fine.
But, but there are multiple genocides of humans that would be bigger than anything in real history. And we're just kind of meant to be like, okay, but they've got cool bolters. 75 caliber bolt gun, that's pretty awesome though.
Yeah, and I can't wait to like sort of paint my little models of all of these guys, you know.
These guys
is giving
are
me
my
some
friends
great
now.
ideas. It's like it there is a real kind of product placement thing in, and obviously this ties into the kind of like spectrum stuff of every time these guys show up, there is a moment where it's like, and then it was the like extremely even more special forces squadron of the special unit of the special unit, and these guys wear entirely differently colored armor, which means you're going to need to buy a different set of paints for these guys. And I as a kind of like sort of marketing exercise, that sort of like in a really cynical way that quite pleases me, that I'm like I can see the kind of big dollar signs in like Games Workshop HQ over this of being like, and these guys wear black armor with red trim, and you're just like meanwhile you're like ordering in a bunch of like black and red paint.
Yeah, I mean, it took like 10 years from when this was written to when they actually started producing models for the Horus Heresy. Like you can
Really?
go get Horus Heresy. Yeah, they didn't
Huh.
merchandise this right away. They
Bizarre.
you can get models of all the guys. You can get your Sultavits. You got a nice Lucius, where later on he's got scars and he's bald. I love Lucius, by the way. He's like the only compelling character in this.
Yeah.
Because he's such a little cunt. He's so cunty.
It's like, yeah, the world may be like infinite genocides, but on the other hand, I'm gonna go the extra mile, you know? Like
Yeah.
just be really interpersonally difficult to work with.
Yeah, why not? I mean, you've already committed 3 genocides. You can be a evil twink.
Yeah, absolutely. God,
Yeah.
I mean that was a past life. The evil twink part, not the genocide part.
So yeah, you can buy all these guys. You can even buy we haven't talked about Samus, the demon yet. You can buy a Samus model. It's the ugliest piece of crap I've ever seen in my entire life. It costs about £80.
Let me have a look at this.
Yeah, it's got Samus 40k model, and it should be the first. Yeah, Samus Demon.
Oh, that's terrible.
I know.
Wow.
Yeah,
okay.
£94.
Yeah, certainly.
Oh, it's got a bum. Look at the third. It's got an ass. It's got like an actual cheeked ass.
Really does have like a sort of sculpted ass. You know,
yeah, not
wearing
a good one either. Like
wearing a lot of skulls for like effect. You know,
some like skin, got a little skin skirt going on. So that was Samus. He was like a big red dog man with an ass. And,
I guess this is also the problem with like again a lot of the like comprehending the incomprehensible horrors, where it's like, you know, everybody's minds are being stalked by this like invasive psychic presence that sort of like is very grim and turns like brother against brother, and then this manifests itself as like big arse out dog man. It's like, well, okay, sure.
Yeah. It's did you listen to this on audiobook or did you read it?
I just read the ebook.
I read the audiobook, or listened to the audiobook. I shouldn't say I've read it. And the Samus dialogue is full ASMR, and I actually got tingles. Is yeah, if you're into your ASMR and also genocide, then highly recommend the audiobook of this.
Yeah, I mean,
I'm sure there are Nazi MSRs somewhere deep on YouTube.
God. Yeah, ASSMR. I really I appreciate the effort to make sort of chaos seductive, right? I think it works very well in this book. It's just as I say, it kind of it poses some problems for the kind of like worldview here, to be like, yeah, also there are, you know, like, you know, the sort of like arseless chap's red dog man is, you know, lurking out there, just waiting for you to decide in your own mind that like Bush wants to start the war for oil.
I think we can leave it at arseless arse chap's dog man. I'm so
the Navy SEALs have like assassinated arseless red dog man in a compound in Abbottabad, Pakistan.
It's just Saddam underground, but like this with a big red arse
caked up. Yeah.
So arse out dog man, good place to end. November, where can people find you?
Well, so I have a number of podcasts, an increasing number, in fact. If you've like listened through to the plug section, thank you for that. So I do a podcast called Trashfuture. I do a podcast called Kill James Bond. I do a podcast called Well, There's Your Problem. And then I am launching very soon a fourth one with Riley from Trashfuture and Matthew Lubchansky called No Gods, No Mayors, about municipal government, sort of profiles and courage of America's weirdest mayors. So look out for that in the very near future.
That sounds cool.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
My favorite podcasts are the stuff that if I try to explain it to anyone normal, they will think I'm even worse than I am.
Oh, yeah,
that
totally.
sounds like totally like one of those. So
yeah, listening
I
to a
will
podcast about
check that
Rudy
out.
Giuliani, you know?
He is a terrible mayor. So
Absolutely.
yeah, great. So yeah, folks, come back pretty soon because we're going to have another guest talking about another very odd, problematic book, and we'll also be doing some little deep dives into the lore, critical deep dives. I'm not going to kiss the lore's ass or anything, but think about asses, and I can't. It's on my other monitor to this one. I can't stop looking at
yeah.
it. Like,
This is how chaos fucking gets you.
It is. Yeah, I'm done. Yeah, I'm going to start sprouting horns and tentacles any second now. So, folks at home, come back next week. Listen to Trashfuture and Kill James Bond and Well, There's Your Problem and Mayors 1.
No gods, no mayors.
I knew that. And I'm not being distracted by the arse again. And
remember your oaths of moment, brother.
Oaths of moment is I need to do more sit-ups. Come back next time. See you around.